Chapter 6. The Hunt. My eyes flickered open to the sound of snores, causing me to lift my skull from a pillow of stone. Instantly, gutted, as my hands danced atop the stains of blood glued to my face. And it felt like I had gone 12 rounds with my hands tied behind my back, the lid of my eye swelling to the size of a mushroom. Gregory had fallen asleep, his back still perched up against the wall and his mouth wide open, resembling a chainsaw while he snored, likely sunk deep into the warm blanket of a REM cycle, something that eluded me the night before as it felt like my eyes closed to morning and blinked into day. I had risen just in time for sunrise, and the sight that brought with it was exceptional. A gleaming orange hue blended in with sprinkles of bright yellow sunburst that seeped through the once dark clouds, the entire island foaming with warmth, while the once muddled ground dried. 'Twas a pretty picture indeed, but in the state I was in, even pretty pictures made me frown. Still stuck in sorrow, while my hunger continued to grow, the only form of solace being the rejuvenation felt in my legs. While still scabbed, my feet were usable again. Progress at a snail's pace, but progress nonetheless. As my anchor had become less heavy, it made me hopeful that Gregory was still interested in carrying it. I strolled over towards my lumbering companion and put my head close to his, observing a mug that was clinging to sleep-filled serenity while grievously breathing through his once crooked nose. For a few seconds, I stared at him in wonderment, confused how he could even consume air, while simultaneously sounding like an elephant being choked to death. Destroying the wistful peace painted on his face wasn't the only reason I feared waking him. I was still guilty from the night before, keenly aware of how brainless I became once introduced to a small sliver of uncertainty. The last thing I needed was another lecture to pull me deeper into the depths of regret. Knowing the gift of daylight, and how much utility it held for the two of us, I woke the bearded giant from his slumber, knocking on his forehead like he had once done to me. Like a light being flicked on, Gregory was at full capacity.
"Oh, good morning, Walter. Thanks for waking me. We have a big day today," he blurted,
as if he had been waiting all morning to say it. I had no words to reply with, thrown off by his jubilance, not expecting to wake someone up who was so disparate from the man who scowled me the night before. A deserving sermon, I thought, would continue, and yet he continued to smile while I continued to frown. I thought you'd be angry with me. What I did yesterday, it was unforgivable. I could have died, and you could have died. I had no right. My words were cut off by his hand, which raised in the air, pleading for me to stop.
"Oh, no need to fear, young one. There's no reason to dwell on the past," he assured me. "I treat my worries like I treat my clothes, tossing them in the hamper by the end of each night as if they've gotten too dirty, ready to start anew the next morning, just to the nines and clean as a whistle." The man contained an envious mindset, and one I was grateful for. "So, what's on the docket for today?" I asked, eager to turn to a fresh slate. "Today, we hunt. And I know exactly what's on the menu," he avowed, his voice excited and bold.
"You want to kill the monster that attacked me last night?"
"You know how dangerous that is," I rebuffed, surprised a man so cautious could be so foolhardy. "Of course I do. I'll never forget," he barked, his face momentarily expressing the same stern disappointment he was wearing the night before reverting into a simper. "Despite their repugnance and the euphoria that would come with killing them, I'm not interested in the three ghosts. In fact, I'd like to avoid them at all costs. Now your little friend, well, he's a different story entirely."
His words made my heart burst into seams. Killing the precious animal that saved my life seemed abhorrent, so much so that pondering even the mere thought of it would warrant a one-way ticket to hell. I owed the beast my life. Under no circumstances was I going to take his. "That's not happening," I gruffed,
doing my best to keep a mutual level of respect between us while fighting off the waves of annoyance that were crashing within me. "Oh, but we are," he cheered, pulling from the ground 2 freshly sliced spears. "Aren't they beautiful? I made them last night while you were sleeping. Thought it would be a nice surprise in the morning," he gushed, my words flying over his head as I somehow hiked above his home on Cloud 9. Look, I'm aware of the situation we're in. The lack of food, lack of resources, all of it. But what he did for me last night, how he... "Don't you like them?" he clucked over me, his brow dropping in mild confusion. For but a second I glared at the deadly weapons in his hands, then up at the deadly eyes in his face. "Yeah, they look great," I hastily quipped before finishing my point, his brow now pleasantly in the air. He fought tooth and nail for me, for no reason other than the fact that he wanted to save me, to keep me protected. How can we target someone like that? He's the type of person we need to be looking for, I pleaded. "First off, he's not a person. He's a fiend. Call him what he is. Second, you have no reason to be looking for that type of person because one is standing right in front of you. Thirdly, if you value protection, then maybe accept the man offering you a meal when you're amid starvation. Do I make myself clear?" he bickered. I looked at him perplexed, aghast at the alpha gibberish that was spewing from his mouth. We didn't have time for his little power plays, and yet there he stood. "Your little hairless friend is the only salvageable piece of food that isn't capable of killing or poisoning us. He has just been battered and beaten, is armless and likely already almost dead. There is nothing to discuss," he hissed. Gregory was slipping back into his fear of chagrin, but contesting him was worth it to preserve the ounce of ethical decency I had left. "If you expect me to drive a spear through the heart of a creature that freed me from death, then you expect too much of me. We can't just ignore the moral fiber that keeps us sane. If we abandon that, then we'll become lost," I asserted. It was as if I had told him the world was about to detonate into a million pieces, his head cocking back while he geared up for his next verbal lashing. I was more than prepared. "You have the gall to speak about morals in a time like this. A time where we are treading on the smallest of fumes, and where our survival is hanging in the balance of something that is almost in our reach. You have the gall to speak about my expectations of you as if they're high. I expect you to sit and watch while I kill the beast, and I expect you to be the first person in line when it comes to eating it. My expectations are not high for you, Walter Mai. The fact that you're on the verge of still falling beneath them is downright depressing." His apparent coping mechanism was a clear ruse. Stevie Wonder could see the man was still enraged with me whether he admitted it or not. Killing the beast would be akin to killing the reminder of my betrayal. I couldn't blame him for being persistent, but I can blame him for being a liar. Walter, there's no need for us to hurt each other like this. Today was supposed to be a fun little bonding session while we hiked and hunt. There's still time for us to correct this train before it skids further off the track, though. I say we start anew. A fresh start on our day. What do you say?" he crowed, his fist in the air in triumph, and an offer I couldn't possibly refuse. He too had saved me multiple times. It wasn't worth risking his happiness to preserve my poor excuse for morals. In my mind, thinking I was already sliding headfirst into the gates of hell anyway, so I might as well make it a worthy trip. "Let's do it," I bellowed, mirroring his excitement. "Okay, wake me up again," he blurted, and then dropped to the floor like a dead fish. I was lucky that the luster atop the musing star below me never seemed to wear off. Even in that moment, his absurdity made me gleefully surprised. "Wake up!" I yelled and smacked him atop his cranium. He flew to the air and thrusted his hands atop my shoulders and shook me in a frenzy. "Ah, today is a beautiful day, my fine gentleman. Today is the day in which we kill a savage, a monster who is a foreign brute and unlike any we've ever encountered before. For this endeavor do not fear, for we will attack like lions on a gazelle. Lions always target the weak, the slow, or the alone. We are in great fortune. It seems as our prey shares all of these traits. And so I say we take the lion approach. And we are lions, Walter, are we not? He roared, chanting with the spirit of a middle school cheerleader. I guess so, I answered, my fist thrusting in the air. I know so, he corrected, as his fist joined me in the most awkward bro pound that has ever occurred in the history of time. Alas, we came out the gates hot, primed and ready for flesh. Well, one of us did. Sadly, for the monster's sake, it was the only one that mattered. And so, we were off, gallant and chipper, while our next journey began. For the first time, it would involve us attacking helpless prey, not the other way around. Like most things in life, I found a way to spin it into a negative, left harping on the inevitable death of my heroine. That being said, I still wanted to prepare for any scenario. I knew Gregory loved his spears. Well, I had a different approach. Several rocks the size of baseballs littered the floor, designed perfectly for throwing. A couple swift hucks, and who knows, maybe a little guy like me could knock out the animal equivalent of Andre the Giant. I was honestly feeling an odd boost of confidence, so much so that taking down a dwarf-sized animal didn't seem like much of a test. I stuck 4 of the little buggers in my jean pockets and filled up on ammunition. 'Twas a tight squeeze, but a necessary sacrifice. "And just what are you doing with those?" asked Gregory, as he trotted out in front, leading our 2-man pack down a hollow trail. He probably felt it was necessary to poke fun at my weapon of choice as a clever retort to my little jab from earlier. What a funny guy he was. "I thought the beast and I could have a catch. I'm so lonely on this island, Gregory. Do you think he'll be my friend?" I said. The joke eluded Gregory's ears as he glared up at me with the solemn eyes. "I thought I was your friend, Walter. I thought you liked me." His serious doe eyes spurned a devilish smile on my face. "No, you don't count. I want a real friend, not some guy forced to be with me." Again, my jokes falling atop an empty audience. "Forced to be with you? I quite enjoy you, Walter. You challenge me. Keep me on my toes. My mind has never been sharper." I'm not so sure you understood what the word sharp meant. Calm down, jeez. I like you too. Most of the time, I replied. Specks of truth dusted atop a fact that was teetering with every hour. Instead of explaining the cognitive dissonance he often elicited in me, I decided to lie. Spewing lies isn't fun for everybody, but in situations like these, boy, do they work. Gregory beamed at me. "You kind soul, I swear to you, I'll put that boreal demon in that tiny stomach of yours before the day rests," he exulted. And so another seam in my heart snapped, pained as the man was still unaware of the damage he was about to inflict. Alas, there we were, a weak 29-year-old man-child with some rocks, and a burly fool with an arts and crafts sculpted spear, like a modern-day Vincent Vega and Jules Winfield, a lethal combination. In all honesty, deep down, I was pretty amped. Part of me enraptured by the chance for fresh meat, and another still bogged down in the saturation of moral ambiguity. Both parts of me conflicted. I think I was excited for solely a biological purpose, nothing more. My brain had been hardwired to attain food when hungry at all costs. The prospects of catching food was tantalizing to my matter, causing my mouth to drool at the mere thought of it. I displayed Pavlovian responses like a silly dog. Fun fact, natural instinct really wants people to eat. Mine wasn't any different. The bacteria-sized chance of eating fresh meat was orgasmic to my screaming lining of emptied intestines. Sorry about being graphic. I was just really fucking hungry. After a while, I noticed that we had been tracing the disheveled tracks of the attack from the night before, arriving at the epicenter of the skirmish, which was now a crater of pelted mud. A rather haunting sight, littered with prints and molds of bodies. Surprisingly, no sources of those molds still stood there. It seemed everyone had left with their lives, the one-armed creature included. Without making a peep, Gregory scanned over the area, analyzing the tracks like a well-paid detective as he oogled over each marking in the earth, ripping plants root and stem from the floor,
revealing the trajectory of each assailant. His findings? 6 that contained north along the dirt pavement, and 2 meandered west along the jungle's carpet. The moment my savior's tracks were spotted, Gregory punched his hand into the dirt and cupped fresh soil until it spewed out from the sides of his knuckles. His eyes locked onto his incredible discovery, revealing a maddening sense of satisfaction while he took a big whiff of the brown sludge. His eyes then flickered onto mine, and he smiled wide, cracking his chapped lips. A small drizzle of blood fell from his smirk and was engulfed by the forest of hair that drooped from his chin. We followed the tracks with our weapons in hand and relied on luck to guide us towards our rabid meal. A perfect strategy. Fortunately, the prints were clear as day, deep and prominent in the earth. Gregory would occasionally stop to comment on the size of them and speculate. "Could be an ape-based mutant, Walter. The feet are very similar in shape," he would often point out, flexing his knowledge of the animal kingdom. "Can't be. When I remember, it barely had any hair. Looked more like some goblin to me," I quipped. "So your hypothesis is that the creature is some sort of magical being rather than an actual animal. You may need to seek out a refund on that zoology degree of yours, my friend. What did I say about questioning me?" I suppose you're right," I shrugged. Arguing with Gregory had become a tiresome endeavor on my depleting mind. He never wanted to be incorrect. Being wrong to him was impossible. If his answer was wrong, then there was something wrong with the question. It reminded me of my father, which is surprising considering the brief catalog of memories I could draw about that man. 12 years may be long for some, but for me, it may as well have been 12 minutes. Perhaps Gregory was spurning thoughts about my father upon me, and I didn't even realize it. Projected and hidden reflections I thought were left away in a box. Having experienced my companion's sickly trait before, it was likely that I was hyper-aware to that effective type of communication, or lack thereof. I always felt like communication was a vital part of the human existence. It can be constructive for the mind. One just has to make sure there is someone listening. If not, no need to fear. Talking to oneself is always helpful. At least for me it is. If you don't want to appear insane, silence is always preferable to communicating with a vociferous madman. Unfortunately, I was stuck on an island with one. Empathy for my mother grew every minute I spent with Gregory. It was a feeling I could only conceptualize before. Every time he would make a cutting, know-it-all remark, a shot of anger would explode in my brain. The march towards fury is a long one, full of plights and hostility, and to put it in simple terms, Gregory made it a shorter trip. He wasn't all bad, though. Definitely a helpful person. Ignorant to his brash nature, but under his eyes was a yearning to serve. It's more than I could say about my dad. But if you don't mind, I'd rather say nothing about that man. Thoughts about that human are better left in the frozen cellar of my unconscious. No need to thaw it out. Before me, staggering yellow rays pierced through the trees above as the sun began its methodical boiling of the island. The ground was hardening, vacuuming up the vast puddles of rain, imprints of the beast unaffected by the sudden rush of dryness that swallowed the land. We followed the long trail as its route became familiar. We passed by a tower devastated by lightning strikes, a tree infected by slugs and termites, and finally, Gregory's old shelter. Somehow making our way through the maze with gusto, our sprints and spirits as high as ever. Gregory had done me the great service of lending me his size 14 shoes, which helped keep my feet nestled inside a warm, sweaty shield of safety. It was a tad disgusting, but devastatingly effective. Before we had the chance to depart from Gregory's old stomping grounds, I decided to pluck Chekhov's gun from the ether and inquire once more about the man's ever-special necklace. A locket he admired so much that it made Gollum's precious seem to be as important as a crusty old ring pop. The image of him ravaging through the fallen shelter was a sight that had left my mind, only to return as the sound of toads throbbing echoed in the air. The evergreen dome around us sparking flashbacks to a simpler time, when Gregory was a stranger and when I was a survivor of only one monster-laden attack. "Gregory!" I shouted as I glared at the splintered wreckage. He had been sailing forward, only to return with a chaffed visage. "That bastard rifled through my home," he shouted as he dove to the floor, again plundering through his house, seeking any salvageable piece he could find.
"Well done spotting this out, Walt. I seem to have missed the side of it. No need to fear, though. That little ogre seemed to have left with everything intact."
"I was more so interested in that locket of yours. I just realized that even after talking for hours on end, you still haven't brought it up. Maybe we can change that," I suggested. The secrecy Gregory held was honestly interesting to me. There was nothing more gripping in my eyes than an open book's closed chapter. "In due time, my friend, in due time," he repeated. Such a tenuous tease. Blow after blow, my excitement during the hunt plummeted. In hindsight, I shouldn't have even asked the question. Very often for me, finding the truth leads to sad results, and so the cycle continued. After a brief rest to gather my wits, I reverted my focus to something more attainable than authentic entertainment: food. Over time, the prince felt like a long trail of breadcrumbs. Step by step, our meal felt closer, but guilt brimmed inside me. Sure, I was hungry. Hunger is powerful, but killing a living, breathing thing is also powerful. Maybe if we kept trekking deeper into the island, we could discover vegetation or fruit. Perhaps destroying the animal's life wasn't the only solution. A balancing act being performed in my brain, but as every second dripped by, the scale tilted increasingly towards my stomach. Spotted frogs following us everywhere we went, my fear of them subsided as their presence grew comforting. Dangerous, but if death by poison was my end, they seemed to have missed the memo. Eventually, every time I saw them was a friendly reminder that I wasn't alone on the island with a pack of vicious savages. An important reminder to keep. Bug-eyed creatures that always stayed close, watching me intently with every footstep I took. Some even hopped square on top of my shoes, and just sat there for a few minutes until I had to wiggle them off. Gregory's sneakers were the closest they ever got to the man, and in truth, they seemed to like it that way. The pack of assassins couldn't care less about Gregory, which is something he seemed to prefer. "You better be careful of those frogs, Walter. I wouldn't even look in their direction. They're smart animals. One shot of venom will kill you. Don't give them a reason to use it," he would often warn me. They must not have liked him. Smart animals indeed. We made our way through the swarm of mangled bushes that circled the pond until we arrived at a long, harrowing tree. A distinct chill vibrated my back as the sound of the waterfall could be heard chirping in the air. "Over there by the base. That has to be them," Gregory blurted as he sprinted towards the footprints. The monster's marks were small, similar to that of a child's in length. Conversely, the width was bulbous and jarring, an odd combination but easily distinguishable, which helped make its trail a tad easier to follow. "Hey, Greg, do you remember seeing the monster?" "But of course I do. It nearly bit your face off," snapped Gregory, surprised I thought he would forget such an ordeal. "No, you don't understand. Did you actually get a good look for the thing?" I repeated. He paused and stared at the tree for quite some time until he continued. "Well, it wasn't large by any means. It was like some little munchkin jacked up on steroids. Not a pleasant sight. Its arm was rather ghastly, if I'm being honest. It frightened me. Open flesh can fall victim to infection, and eating something infected is a rather poor choice indeed. Who am I to complain, though? Those who need shouldn't waste their time with wants. We need food, and it's food. End of discussion," he affirmed. It was impressive to me how a man could simultaneously understand what you're saying and still miss the point. I was still clinging to logic as my verbal weapon, despite Gregory's built-in shield. Fair enough. I just want to kill it quickly, though. No need to make it suffer. A forthright request, and one that was greeted with a mouthful of laughter. "Oh, heaven forbid we let a monster taste what we've been dealing with for the past week. Rest assured, Walter, if it has a heart, my spear will pierce it. It won't feel a thing." His confidence worried me. People who take pride in their ability to end lives aren't people I usually trust. But I needed to trust Gregory. Who else could I? We continued forward until at last we arrived at my favorite spot on the island. Thunderous splashes echoed throughout the crater as our eyes peered to the entrance. Knee-high grass swallowed up the trails of footprints, our scorching hot breadcrumbs falling cold. Gregory did not take misfortune particularly well. "Isn't he a tricky one?" Gregory exclaimed as his enthusiasm waned. He muttered hushed words under his breath as he scratched at his arms. Splotches of mosquito chomps colored his limbs red. Not once did he complain about it. Small wonders like that never ceased to amaze me. Drops of sweat swam down his forehead until they were engulfed by his growingly large beard. The two of us gazing up around the oasis, failing to spot a living soul outside the birds fluttering atop the summit of the waterfall. A rare sight on the island. "He could have gone anywhere at this point. The grass is too thick for me to track. I'll have to walk the perimeter," said Gregory as he twirled the spear in his fingers. Before he had the chance to leave, I offered one last observation. "He has to come back. At some point, though, right? I mean, this is the only place to drink on the entire island." "And he has clearly been here before," I replied. In a flash, his face transformed from drained sorrow to childish joy. "Walter my! Sheer brilliance runs through you, young man. We will make camp here and wait for the bastard to come crawling back to none the wiser. How wonderful it will be," he bubbled. I was never sure if I should have felt grateful or insulted whenever Gregory complimented me. He treated me like a toddler, throwing a faint praise every time I came up with an idea. Reinforcement isn't always necessary, but in Gregory's eyes, I was like a stray dog he needed to train. Coming up with basic thoughts and vocalizing them was akin to sit, a simple thing he felt the need to emphasize and enforce. My wondrous idea had left us with what is commonly referred to as a stakeout. Stakeouts are prone to being colossal wastes of time. Time on the island was a precious currency, and by choosing this activity, it was as if our cold hard cash was being thrust down the drain. Then again, what more could we do? Was missing out on another round of 20 questions such a sinful tragedy? You think spending the day getting to know Gregory better was a better alternative? I'm growing rather tired of asking you these ridiculously fictitious questions. I think by now you know the answers. Like the amenable Boy Scouts we were, within a few seconds we were hard at work with our next creation. With the help of some fallen leaves and branches, we created what can only be described as the eighth wonder of the world. Standing 5 feet high was one of the most ill-advised and hastily produced teepees in existence. An albatross creation clear as day within our new world of carefully composed beauty. Each speck of the island was vibrant and perfectly formed, and then came our tower, that shattered that notion into oblivion. Appearance is one thing, but its utility was unquestionably effective. From the 2 minuscule and almost invisible holes we placed, one could see a vast majority of the waterfall, along with its base. I may have a calling in architecture, my friend. This right here is magnificent," spewed Gregory, as he made his way into the tower. "How does it look, Walter?" Gregory asked with a boyish grin on his face. I'm able to describe his ridiculous expression due to his entire body from the neck up starkly protruding out from the pile. Bliss sprang in my matter as a thought sparkled in my head. "Almost done," I yelled, and then happily threw a few branches on top of Gregory to cover his ugly mug. I took a few steps back and smirked at our groovy green bundle of garbage. It was time efficient, only taking us about 15 minutes to put together. And boy, did that show. In all honesty, it looked shamefully atrocious, but we couldn't be seen. And that was the goal, right? The two of us sat close to each other, nuzzled nice and warm under the roof of leaves. Bile, body odor fumed from Gregory's skin, leaving my nose clogged with his hideous scent. I felt trapped in a block of overstimulation, but I couldn't move. Any misstep could have caused the hideout to come crumbling down. To make matters worse, Gregory started doing what he did best. He talked. Endless chatter with nothing to say. The two of us growing bored while he shifted and searched for the next lively subject to discuss. His repeated advice and anecdotes were growing stale, as if they were already burned into my cerebrum, and he was plucking away at my loose storage. The man's endless range had lasted us over an hour, and while his stem was slowly running out, he decided to take one last shot in the dark. "So, Walter, you never mentioned if you had a sweetheart missing you at home. Is there a lucky lady waiting in the wings for you back in the city? He inquired, opening a can of worms I often prefer to keep closed. Nope, I sneered, annoyed my response would elicit an unfortunate bump of Gregory's attention. Like a moth to a light, he sprinted towards one of my least favorite topics. Why no woman in your life, Walt? A fine, strapping man like you, he gushed, patting me on the back while I beguiled in a cramped, uncomfortable pit. I gave up on women a long time ago, I admitted. His body then shook in bewilderment, nearly causing the tower to come crashing down. You believe in love? He asked. The question truthfully warmed my heart. It was like when a child talks about the Easter Bunny. Of course I believe in love, but I also know love has an expiration date. It comes and burns bright, and then fades away until it's nothing. How so? He asked. Well, think about it. What was your favorite food growing up? Which movie did you love watching 10 years ago? Can you tell me what your go-to song was in college? You see, if I wanted to know the current version of those answers, they'd all be different. You've changed, and what you've loved is no longer what you want. Because want is an adaptation. It bends and twists to form what we need. But once what we need is fulfilled, another need will form, because no one is ever complacent with what they have. There always needs to be more. For what reason, I have no idea. And yet it's in all of us. Your wants start forming when fulfillment is achieved, remarked Gregory. Fulfillment and self-actualization? They're impossible goals, Greg. Maslow is an asshole for putting that at the top of his pyramid. Not a soul can reach such a level, not even Jesus H. Christ. Nonsense. I doubt any of that is true. You're still a child, after all. No need to fear, though. You have more than enough time to find that special someone. She's out there, Walter, whether you believe it or not. Even the most prickly of cactus can grow flowers sometime. There's no need to fear. As they say, many fish in the sea, love can be ripe for the taking. With a delightful metaphor to make life's complex problems crumble into simplicity. He failed to realize that trying to find love, all those delicate moments could lead to multiple breaks. The more people I've tried to let in, the more empty I felt. Like when a night sky is missing its moon, left with nothing in sight to light my darkness. Well, with my approach for women, I'm basically a fisherman, casting my hook without any bait. The only way I could catch a fish is if they clammed down on empty steel. If that were to happen, then I'd probably catch myself a pretty daft flounder. Thus it would be tossed back into the blue abyss where it belongs. And now you know my conundrum. My maze of solitude without an exit in sight. And is it depressing? Of course. But it's a depression I chose, and because of that, it doesn't make me depressed, I exclaimed. He sighed. Oh, no need to be melodramatic. You're just a product of your time, stuck in a shameful youth that has always had to cling to absolutes. Just because the minor pool in which you've swam contained a few aberrations doesn't mean the entire ocean is littered with them. All the kids nowadays are just too scared to test the waters. It's such a sad fate to live, snorted Gregory, as he grievously picked the silt that caked under his toenails. It's always pleasant when your bare heart is met with contemptuous scorn, confirming my tendencies to hide it all for everyone to see. Instead of deflating into a mute, I ignored the ageist jab and continued. It's not that I couldn't find anyone, it's just that I grew tired of them, trying to please people who never looked my way. It was exhausting, sprinting down a dead end and every time crashing flat against a wall. It always hurt, and I never caught them. After a while, I changed tact. I ran the other way, avoiding the wall and chasing something I knew I could catch. Myself. Self-improvement is fulfilling, though, and with the right focus, anyone can achieve it. Biological purpose be damned. If I'm happy, then why change course? I offered. A statement only half believed was true. "Are you happy, Walt?" Gregory asked with mild surprise. The million-dollar question almost everyone gets wrong. "Do I look happy?" I answered. "Well, happiness is different for everyone, Walt. For me, it's having a wife, kids, a home, and maybe, if I'm lucky, a few adventures sprinkled along the way. I express my happiness by attempting to share that same joy with those around me, maybe with a passing smile or interaction. For others, it's different. That's why I can never tell if someone is truly happy or not. I avoid imparting my own standards onto others, and think it's a very narcissistic thing to do, and so I assume everyone is satisfied unless they tell me otherwise. How they express their inner feelings is none of my business, and that's how it should be." I'd be lying if I said he was wrong. When Gregory decided to use the ounces of sense he was born with, he wasn't a half-bad guy. Even enjoyable. "So, what about me? Do I look happy?" he asked, with a bright, playful grin. I did my best to avoid glaring at his blaring teeth, which hung buttered and broken. "I don't know how you do it, but yes, absolutely. From the moment I first met you, you seemed to just always hover in a state of elation. Every little thing could spark a smile across your face. You're a rare breed, my good sir," I answered. "Spot on, Walter. First impressions are everlasting, it seems. The exception being you, my friend," he bellowed. Gregory, then shifting the conversation to a story about his first love, before my curiosity forced him to stop. "How am I the exception?" I interrupted. It was insecurity that put those words into my mouth. I couldn't help but spit them out. "Well, at first you seemed like an introverted isolate," he answered. "Within every introverted isolate is a narcissistic prick. Everyone and their mother knows that, and if an isolate dared deny it, then they'd become a lying narcissistic prick. Quite the trifecta of a dreadfulness, and not one you possess." He may have been onto something there, but for some reason I doubted his first impression was wrong. I was self-aware enough to realize my programming. "True, but it's all tell them that to their face," I laughed. "That's because there's no one there to tell them. I reckon they like it that way. They stay by themselves to avoid the ridicule of others, just like people latch onto others to avoid the ridicule of themselves. It's no different, and yet the isolate finds those people repulsive, despite the glaring similarity they share. That's the prick in them bubbling to the surface, and sadly they're too enamored by their self-perceived perfection to realize it," chirped Gregory, still laser-focused on the grime atop his feet. "And how is that different from me?" I asked, the words falling from my mouth as Gregory was on the verge of shattering through the self-schema I've spent years building. "I've seen someone like you before. I've seen them stew and grovel and act like the entire world was faulty by design, thinking they were the only person to realize it, thinking they held the key everyone around them was too foolish to misplace. I've also seen that person change, to take what he learned in observation and diffuse those lessons into a more balanced sense of self. In essence, Walt, you're in the midst of a phase. Well, it may linger longer than most. It's still just that, a phase. Just like you're still not the awe-inspired child who used to act on emotion, and just how, like you're not the age-fleeting man yearning for the days of old. Not yet, at least. These phases come and go for people like you, Walter. They are not what define you. It's only when all of those phases are boiled into one that you can settle what makes you yourself. That's why I like you, Walt. That's what makes someone like you unique. The more I talk to you, the more I see you breaking through your mold." Day after day, Gregory, too, was splintering the mold I had placed him in my head. Slightly frustrating, as I'm a guy that often takes great pride in my intuition. The idea that my wide array of hastily packaged boxes were cluttered with mislabelings was a tad too deep for me to ponder, and so I shifted away to something more palatable. We've only been together for a few days. I'm not saying you're being overly bold or rash, but I'm curious what makes you so certain, I earnestly asked, eager to further chip away at the man's growingly stale molding. The person I've met that shares your same convoluted composition happens to be my son. My boy, he answered, the words sounding like they may have torn apart an aging scab. No longer polishing his nails, now smothering his face with his hands. A deep sigh fell from his mouth as he straightened himself upright and wiped his eyes dry. I've never told you about him before, about the wondrous man he came to be. Gregory was no longer speaking with his usual flair, our time spent in the hut likely scratching at his mind while he toiled away. Around us the waterfall sang, thundering overhead while Gregory weathered a storm, his eyes growing heavy, revealing a sentence that did not need to be said. Well, if he's anything like his father, I'm sure he's quite the character, I added. A life preserver, I threw to a man drowning in the barrels of a growingly dangerous conversation. Instead of ending the onslaught, the man continued. My son suffered from a similar affliction. You remind me of him sometimes, Walter, the way you think and feel, raw and expressive. You don't do a great job hiding what comes to your mind. A blessing and a curse. You're the same thing. He stopped speaking for quite some time. It was an accomplishment I wish I had never achieved. Some things are better left ignored, and if anything happened to his son, he'd wait until he felt comfortable enough to tell me. I didn't need to pry. I can respect boundaries. From the looks of it, he felt grateful. I was so young when he was born, Walter. Too young. After my first deployment, I was just afraid. I didn't want to miss out on any of life's gifts. I was just 21 years old. Can you imagine that? Nowadays, that's just enough to buy you a drink. For me, it was just enough to start a family. I met a girl, had a son. It was a special time in my life. Really special. I didn't know it then, but to be fair, I didn't know a lot back then. I was still a kid, in over my head and delirious in love. When you're in love, logic just fades away sometimes. It becomes an afterthought. You didn't ask me that, though. You asked me about my son. I struggle to talk about him, so forgive me if I can't finish. My son was an extraordinary boy. Smart and curious. I didn't know where he got it. He would often question everything. Not out of annoyance, but out of wonder. Even the smallest discovery brought joy to his face. His breathing intensified as his eyes fought back streams of tears. He looked like you, Walter. Feathered hair, brown eyes, full of youth. He then plunged his hand deep into his pant pocket and pulled from it his locket. Slowly he cracked it open to reveal a lovely picture of his family. Gregory without his bulbous beard, and his son and his wife. Thinking back, Gregory had never mentioned he had a wife. Curious, as almost everything else in his life was worn on his sleeve. I knew better than to question somebody's afterthought, though. More accurately, somebody's active coping mechanism. The second something like that is given a spotlight, it melts away. It could have been too cruel of me to inquire. Well, as he got older, he got into trouble. Usual angst developed like any other adolescent, but when coupled with his issues, it became challenging. He struggled in school, never paying attention to anyone or anything. A real troublemaker, which often made me take pause. Stressing morals and virtues, and yet every lesson went in one ear and out the other, he lamented. He was only 25 years old, pure and innocent, leaping great strides with every passing month. I'd visit him ever so often, and every time it would be like I was speaking to a different man. A better man, ever evolving and strong, just like his mother. It was clear these words brought him great sorrow, but he seemed determined to spill them out, to rip the bad taste out of his mouth. I don't know why God took him away from me, but he did. He wiped his face and composed himself, while the trembling in his arm subsided. He then revealed an unexpected smile. "I'll see him again, Walter. I'll see him very soon. That's why I'm always happy. That's my secret. The fuel that helps me brush off the countless little challenges and problems you and I face. With every second that ticks by, I come closer to my son. It's a feeling I can't articulate, but for some reason it's never been more forceful than it is right now. Here on this island. With you," he beamed. "All of it meshing together and ringing in my brain every day. My spirit has never been fuller, and I'm desperately trying to cling to it, to cling to you. That's why I have to protect you. That's why I need you to protect yourself. We provide each other with mutualism, Walter. It's what will guide us through our adventure, a kindred yearning to survive." I mean, what can you say to something like that? I never experienced love in that way. I couldn't relate, and so I did what I was supposed to do. I comforted him and told him I was sorry. I meant it to, but it's hard appearing genuine when every other word you say is trite or sarcastic. "Thank you for listening, Walter. It's not often I talk about him outside my church, but with you here, it was bound to come out. You're too similar. When somebody is comparing a grown adult to a 12-year-old child, it's not usually a compliment. When that child is somebody's dead son, it is. So much so that I felt the need to offer a sliver of myself to Gregory. A rare stroke of truth. It's difficult talking about what mutilates you. The hidden handicap we hide from the world, each of us possessing them, but no one ever points them out. We think if we avoid mentioning them, they'll fade away with the passaging of time. The truth is, they only grow larger the longer you feed them silence. I was no different, thinking I'd forget the feeling of the fall, that if I told myself a lie enough that it would replace the truth, that I'd wake up one day and not be Walter Mai, the boy who attempted. My words dashed away as his hand covered my mouth. "He's here," Gregory whispered, his eyes glaring out from our cracks in our sculpture. My heart pattered, preparing for another serving of anguish, curious if the pain would come in the form of external or internal. Before I could leap from the tower and start my assault, I was held down by Gregory's arm. "Not yet. We must wait for it to come close. Exceptionally close. We won't have another shot at this." I pulled a few stones out from my pocket and clutched them in my hand, waiting for Gregory's cue, my eyes falling upon the animal as it made its way into the water, limping along with its back hunched high in the air. It appears as if he had spent the night in a torture chamber, riddled with tooth marks, gashes, and bruises. It was interesting seeing my savior in the daylight. There was no way around it. He was frightening. Nothing like any sight I've ever seen before. A burly barrel chest with short tree trunks for legs, wiry thin hair scattered across the sides of his face and arms. Not in a structured way, mind you, as if they were stapled onto his skin, patchy and dry. His body appeared to be akin to a human stretched limb from limb, tossed in a vat of acid and left to die on the side of a road. Its nightmarish face spawned straight from a horror movie. Almost elven ears, a blunt stubby nose, a blazing set of cutlery for teeth, and ballooned muddy eyes that completed its demon-like figure. After the devil took a brisk drink from the fountain's pool, its entire warped body made its way into the water, sinking downward until its arms submerged into the blue. Left to fight off its violent squeals of infection, but unsuccessful as they traveled towards us. I knew the pain he felt. Infection is a treacherous friend to have, one that will leave your nerves ravaged and your mind distorted. Seeing the aftermath of his heroics made me ill. Perhaps Gregory wanted us to act like lions, seeking out the ailing and feeble, but this seemed downright cruel. I would have felt better if we had encountered his corpse lying in a ditch. That way I wouldn't have to fester in a broth of culpability. Anxious to remedy my duress, I offered the beast one last lifeline. Gregory, if we kill this creature, then we're no better than them, turning into monsters who prey on the weak. We still have more time to search, to scour the island one final time. Perhaps we'll find fruits or grains, anything that isn't him. Look, I'm begging you to reconsider, I pleaded. Fine, he sighed, his head dropping, while his mind raced and rattled. I could see the visual thinking firing in his brain just as clearly as I could see the unfortunate resolution he came up with. I say, we attack now. Kill him clean and kill him quick. You say you don't want to take his life? That's fine, I'll do it. With your permission, we can still save him from the torment his wounds will cause. Think of it as a thank you for what he did for us, he suggested, gingerly pulling an extra spear from my grasp, his words soothing and tranquil, resting my mind to ease as it released the final nail in the animal's coffin. Fine. Just don't expect me to watch, I solemnly replied. Wouldn't dream of it, Gregory blurted. He then angled his torso towards the beast, twisting and shifting until his trajectory would strike perfection. Hurriedly he shifted, smacking his booming arms against the sides of our tower. In response, several branches came tumbling down the sides, each and every one cracking against the earth like a drum, a pounding noise that seared the linings of both our stomachs. We had awoken the beast from his peaceful trance. I just knew it. A suspicion that was confirmed once I peered back towards the water, which was now empty. Two pale emerald eyes stared towards us, as the animal's chest arched high in the air, observing the area like a general observes a battlefield. It didn't take long before he spotted our flaming hideout. I crumbled in horror as it slithered towards the tower, its hands clenched and teeth bared. Gregory then gave me a tap on my shoulder and whispered, I'm sorry for this, as he rose up from the pile of debris. Before he had the chance to make his pitiful huck, his bulbous head struck the roof, causing our creation to come crumbling down. Sticks flew in the air like dynamite exploding below a stack of lumber. The monster roared as the giant... Gregory had then emerged from the pile and heaved his spear 30 feet through the air. It traveled seamlessly in the sky, soaring with great might until the path abruptly stopped. A vicious slice taken from the monster's shoulder blade, as the weapon collapsed straight into the dirt. The animal fell to its knees, squealing and flailing like a stuck pig, its voice echoing for all to hear, and yet the only answer he received was the triumph of his assassin. That'll slow you down, Gregory bellowed as he marched towards his prey. Suddenly, the rush of guilt that had been tearing away at me detonated in full force, an overflowing of emotion whose waves pulled me under a riptide. Stop, please, Gregory, stop, I yelled as the man stood proudly over his hunt, his spear softly slicing into the creature's neck while he hung his wooden blade close to its flesh. I too emerged from the fallen fortress, meeting the verdant eyes of the fallen victim, feeling the pain he felt, the blood he bled. Look, I was wrong, and I know we've gone so far, but we can't do this. I'm just so... My words trailing off as I fell into a blubbering mess. Gregory could sense my panic and did his best to console me before he had to make his final blow. There is nothing more for us to discuss, Walter. This thing, whatever it is food. Without it, we'll die. Plain and simple. Is this savage worth dying over? He asked. My companion using a rare vaccine of logic to heal the guilt-riddled virus growing beneath me. Again, he wasn't helping as I was continuing to panic. He's not some common animal, Gregory. He's different. He's different. I'm certain of it, I pleaded. He is food. Food, nothing more, Gregory shouted. Then, suddenly, the monster's arm raised in the air, his bloodied finger pointing towards the top of the waterfall. Food, it murmured.